It's the user. It's the intention behind the words that makes them good or bad. The words are completely neutral. The words are innocent. I get tired of people talking about bad words and bad language. It's the context that makes them good or bad.
Hello, fellow Canadians. Come closer. Pay attention. We're in a bit of trouble in this country because the CBC, our public broadcaster, has decided that they're going to be the final arbiter on words that you and I can say. Things that are pretty innocuous, things that you probably use in your everyday life. Well, now they're verboten, according to the CBC. All right, well, let's bring together a group of political experts and commentators, Lorne Gunter, Lorrie Goldstein, and Lorne Kinsella. Lorrie, let me start with you. I know you're a grandfather, and so you're going to be grandfathered into this conversation, but we're not allowed to say that anymore. So why don't you show us the list of the evil words, according to the CBC?
Well, we have ghetto, blackmail, gypped, to sell down the river, savage, lame, powwow, tribe, black sheep, crippled, blindsided, first world problem, spirit animal, lame, tone deaf, and grandfathered in. Society will obviously collapse if we keep using these words. Wouldn't you have loved to have been in the CBC story meeting that came up with this one? Like, okay, we've got a pandemic, we've got the new Omicron variant, we've got inflation, we've got a housing crisis. Let's talk about the words that people shouldn't use. Now, just to make a distinction, the CBC can use or not use any word it wants to. We would say for ourselves, we decide what words go in, what's acceptable in our paper. But what would presume the state-funded broadcaster to advise to the public, these are the words you might not want to use. Like now, to understand the mentality in the CBC, this goes back years ago when there was a complaint about them not calling terrorists terrorists. And the CBC ombudsman at the time said, no, this was a good policy. Just let me read you what they were advising their staff at that time. Instead of calling terrorists terrorists, it suggests calling assailants bombers, hijackers, gunmen, if we're sure no women were in the group, militants, extremists, attackers, or some other appropriate noun. I mean, can you imagine like a reporter talking about 911 and not being able to call it a terrorist act, or a gunman in a mall shooting innocent civilians over for a political cause, and you can't call it like I just look. The CBC can do what it wants, right? But don't tell the rest of us what words we can and can't use.
Exactly, and Lauren, to Lorrie's point, they have the right to say what they want, but all of us that are speaking right now, we all make our living with words. Words are weapons, and we know that those things matter. And yes, there are things in today's zeitgeist that may have been used many years ago that are obviously offensive, but to suggest for a moment that saying spooky, or to suggest that you are using the old sort of colloquialism of selling someone down the river is somehow a no-no. And we know that the CBC always tries to, in spite of the fact that that's what their sort of news policy is, their editorial policy, they try to be the moral authority for all of us and morally swayed all of us to the tune of $1.5 billion that they get of taxpayers' money, Lauren. Yep. Isn't there better things that they should be focused on?
The president of the CBC has called the broadcaster a beacon of truth. Now, you can't go into that statement without being horribly arrogant, tremendously self-possessed. I mean, if you think that somehow your organization, news organization, has a monopoly, or at least is better at the truth, has more of the truth than anyone else, it's ridiculous. And so that's the mentality that comes in here. But the thing that there were two examples in this list that I was most interested in. One's blackmail. You're not supposed to use blackmail because that doesn't have any whiteness. That was actually one of the criteria. That it didn't slag white people, so you couldn't use blackmail. But you couldn't also use sold down the river. Now, most people have no idea that the sold down the river phrase goes back to slavery in the American South, and selling someone down the river meant actually selling them and shipping them down the river. So, we can't use that because there might be someone, a linguist at an obscure university on the Niagara Peninsula, who might know that that is the origin of that phrase. Oh, so we must never, ever use that. But blackmailed has nothing to do with skin color. It goes back to a kind of bribe that was paid by people in the north of England to keep Scots invaders from coming into the north of England 400 and 500 and 800 years ago. So we are supposed to ignore the origins of blackmail, but somehow understand the origins of sold down the river. So this is just wokeness all mixed up in a blender and then poured out into tiny little shot glasses at some sort of CBC meeting.
Warren, I want to, of course, bring you into this conversation. Not only are you one of the best political minds in this country and have, run a few war rooms and written a few books here and there, but you're also a law professor, and you teach your students the ability to be a sound linguist, and that words matter, and using how you form and put these words together, is really important in a legal context, of course. So when you saw this and you read this and you thought to yourself, okay, this is over $1 billion of taxpayers of our money going to the state broadcaster, usually the mouthpiece for Justin Trudeau's government, how did you react? Like, how do you rationalize this?
Well, yeah, I do speak to my students about it, and I, remind them we've got two sections of the criminal code, 319 and 320, that deal with willfully hateful words. But I'm going to say something really offensive, and our producer Nelson may need to censor this part, but I'm just going to read something that's really offensive to anybody who works at the CBC. Okay, you guys ready for this?
Ready.
If I tweet a hashtag about how you didn't do something right or use the wrong verb, then I can sit back and feel pretty good about myself because, man, you see how woke I was? I called you out. That's not activism. That's not bringing about change. If all you're doing is casting stones, you're probably not going to get very far. You should get over that. You know who said that? The guy just over behind me here, Barack Obama. That's what he said about this woke BS. You can fill in that word, CBC, this woke BS that the CBC propagated a few days ago. That's Barack Obama saying that they're crazy. I think they're crazy, and they can go censor me for saying that.
We have a reality in this country, and that is that words are being used against us in favor of a certain sort of perspective right now. We call it wokeness. That's what we say it is right now. And I think, Lorrie, that there's going to be such a fundamental backlash against all of this sort of, parsing of what we say, being quiet. I really actually think it's part of the reason why we see the increase in sort of a divided society, in a way, that we're not allowed to speak honestly. We're not allowed to think honestly. I think that it causes more problems, yet the organizations such as the CBC are so seized with this notion of no divide in society. They, to me, are the ones that seem to be causing it and adding to it.
Well, I think what we're abandoning most of all is context. Why does somebody use a word in a certain context? Because there are things that said one way are not offensive, and said in another way are offensive. But the thing with wokeness, which was started out as an attack on the right, now it's coming after everybody. There are CBC journalists who've had their careers totaled, and I mean totaled, for using a word in the context of a story discussion about someone who used that word, and how and a great career just gets firebombed into oblivion. This is and I think it combines with what's been happening in the liberal universities, in the humanities. It's the death of critical thinking. When I went to university, I could make any argument I wanted in a history or a political paper, and I was judged on the quality of the argument, not the stand I took. Right? From my own children who went to university, I don't think that happens as much anymore. You know what you're supposed to spew back, and you know what won't get you in trouble. So that's what you do. The danger of this is they thought it was just an attack on people like us on this panel. No, no, no. Now it's coming for everybody.
And that's the real danger of this, is that if you can't think about something and express it, then you're blunting debate. You're trying to control society. You're trying to predetermine the outcome before the debate is held. And that's what's really dangerous about this. But I was reminded when I read this about 1971, George Carlin came up with 7 words you can never say on television. And the late, great comedian's 7 words still cannot be said on television.
There is absolutely nothing wrong with any of those words in and of themselves. They're only words. It's the context that counts.
I know all of you have columns to file, so I'm not going to blackmail you to get that done. But Warren, we have a prime minister right now who does like to weaponize words. Who could forget when Justin Trudeau infamously said and corrected someone at a town hall that we call it people kind. We don't call it mankind anymore. This is a very pervasive sort of mentality within the current federal government. But it's oozing into other areas, like your area of law and so many other institutions and organizations in the world of academia and what we're teaching students and kids these days. Is there a rejection happening, or is this just going to go on unabated?
I think it's social media. You got people sitting at home and they think issuing a tweet or posting something on Facebook, as Obama said, that's their activism. But it's not. That's insufficient. And what we now see is our tax dollars are paying for it over at the CBC. And it's ridiculous. Like this book here, I'm going to plug one of my books. This book's about the neo-Nazi movement in Canada. I use the N-word in this book maybe 100 times. And I do that because I am quoting as a journalist what some of these jerks say, because I felt it was important, as Lorrie said, to show the context. Do all of us, you edit a national newspaper, and my colleagues, have been writing for newspapers for years. Do we engage in censorship? For sure. We do not go out to needlessly offend our readers, right? We're not in the business of doing that, but we do need to provide context and a perspective on the world to our readers and to our viewers. And when you're doing what CBC is doing, the biggest failing is not to people like us, the competition. We probably benefit from this stupidity at CBC. They're failing their readers. They're failing their viewers to not give context, and shame on them for doing it.
Well, we always want to hear from you, and we actually don't mind being offended. So send us your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And we always want to keep you informed and, of course, entertained. So please subscribe to the Midday Sun.